I thought what I would do is a little review for anyone who is in my AC classes. Because I was out for that conference, you didn't get any review like my BD classes did. So what I thought I'd do is just review topics 10.1 and 10.2. This review is good for both the multiple choice portion day and the essay day. So on Google Classroom, there's a study guide, of course, that I would hope that you would use. You only need to know European geography, and that's on Quizlet. There will be multiple choice questions, about 30 of them. There'll be one short answer question, think Napoleon. And there will be document readings on that first day to set you up for the second day, which is your essay. So this review video will help you look at both. Again, here is the European geography that you need to know. You can study this, you can study Quizlet, but you should study. We talked about in class on BD days on Friday, we talked about the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman, and the Tokugawa. And I had everyone just write down what they could remember. So that's what I'd like you to do right now. Just write down anything that you can remember, okay, about each. How about where they were located? How about people's names? Anything about religion? Those kinds of things. So if you want to stop the video now and just write down what you can remember, it would be a good way to assess your knowledge. Okay. So here's my cheat sheet for you. The Mughal Empire, obviously in India, Akbar the Great, he's tolerant, he doesn't tax non-Muslims, and he is a Muslim, but the majority of Indians are Hindu. India is open to trade, but the English come and they trade, but then they take over and they colonize. And we're going to return to that story later in our study. The Ottoman Empire, of course, includes the Middle East, North Africa, parts of Eastern Europe. But today we consider it present-day Turkey, which is much smaller. Suleiman the Magnificent was magnificent because he didn't persecute Christians and Jews. He did tax them with a jizya tax, but the Muslim majority allowed religious minority to live and blossom. The Tokugawa shogunate's a little different. They're practicing feudalism. Everything's tied to the land. They have that social triangle. The emperor is on top. Of course, the samurai protects the shogun, who is the real power. They're very isolated, although they do trade with China and Korea, but they always practice either, it's sometimes called selective borrowing or selective diffusion. They take what they want, but they stay true to what they feel Japan is, what Japanese is. They do eventually, well, they're forced to trade with America when Commodore Perry gets off that ship and he's so smelly. And that leads to something new called the Meiji era, which we'll talk about later. Then I asked the class to flip over that piece of paper, so please do that right now, and think about who we talked about with the Enlightenment. And you should have talked about 4 people. So think about who you would write down as Enlightenment thinkers, and then write down what you feel is important about their thoughts. So I'll give you a minute to do that, and then you can stop the video and come back and see my ideas. So of course I have John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau. John Locke is our only Englishman. He writes 2 treatises on government, and he talks about life, liberty, and property. Of course, Thomas Jefferson paraphrases that and says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Baron de Montesquieu, a baron, second estate. He's French, of course. 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. He wanted checks and balances. Voltaire, of course, was French. He believed in freedom of speech, freedom of religion. He said, you know, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it, or I'll defend to my death your right to say it. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a crazy Swiss who wants direct democracy, and he writes something called the social contract, where he thinks that everyone will be on their best behavior because it's in their best interest to be on their best behavior. And of course, the question is, which 3 revolutions do these 4 men influence highly? These 4 enlightened thinkers influence, of course, you can answer it, American, French, and Latin American revolutions in that order. The last thing we did was we used big paper. And you can get another sheet of paper. And basically what you need to do is draw these 4 boxes and a box in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4. And what you're doing is you're setting up for the essay. And when you set up for the essay, in the middle box is the question, was the French Revolution successful? And in a minute, you're going to ask yourself, yes or no. And if it's yes, why? And if it's no, why? And then your essay becomes a pursuit of persuading the reader, me, that the French Revolution was either successful or not. And so each box, what we did in BD classes is everybody wrote down key ideas, and then we used them to think about categories to design thesis statements. So if I look at this and just go through all of these different ideas that I saw my students write down today, you can see I have a bulleted list of all these ideas. Can you write an essay where you include every single detail that is listed here? No, it's just too much. However, if you are going to talk about conditions and phases and Napoleon and impact, you need to talk about some of these examples. Okay? So let's pretend that we categorize these ideas. So if I look back at all of these ideas of causes, bread shortages, absolute monarchy, the Enlightenment, my big ideas are rights, scarcity, and freedom. For phases, again, rights, terror, new calendar, corruption. For Napoleon, stability, schools, laws, rule, war. And then changes, the middle class power grows, nationalism grows, when France is left with a constitutional monarchy. So if I take these big ideas with the details, I can form an opinion. And maybe my opinion is the French Revolution was a success because, or a failure because. And then I get to write a thesis statement. So let me give you an example. The French Revolution was a success because the Third Estate increased its power, the revolution brought law and rights, and Napoleon's rule gave stability and long-term reforms. Then I take each one of these sections, or each one of these ideas, these categories, and I make them sections. So I'll talk about the Third Estate. And when I'm talking about the Third Estate, I can talk about social inequality, I can talk about the three estates, I can talk about causes of the French Revolution. And then when I talk about the revolution brought law and rights, I can talk about, again, causes of social inequality, but I can also talk about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And then when I talk about Napoleon, I can talk about his rise and fall. And then I can return, and these are many paragraphs. Please have paragraphs. These are more sections than paragraphs, okay? And then your conclusion is you come back to it and you state again why the French Revolution was a success out of your main points out of these sections. Let's say you feel the French Revolution was not a success, it was a failure. Here's an example of a thesis statement for a failure. The French Revolution was a failure because liberty and equality were not always protected. The Reign of Terror killed 40,000 French people, and nationalism would lead to World War I. So again, I'm using the same idea, liberty and equality. I'm talking about the causes. I'm talking about this idea of the phases being really violent and people's liberty wasn't upheld. The Reign of Terror, I could talk about how brutal it was and how Robespierre was corrupted by power. And then, of course, I could talk about nationalism, how many countries felt they never wanted to be overtaken by another country because Napoleon controlled so much area. And this leads to a lot of competition and is going to lead to World War I. You do not need to use my examples, but I want to show you what I'm looking for in the essay. So here are your sources for review. On Google Classroom, there is the study guide. Please use it and please use the links. There's a Kahoot link, there's Socrative, and then, of course, your Quizlet. Good luck. See you next week.